the time, it was a clandestine convent because it was obviously at that time illegal to be Catholic in the 1600s, and the nuns operated in disguise. They used pseudonyms, and they were often arrested and taken to jail. It's a most extraordinary story. But towards the end of that story, when the Society of the Sacred Heart move in, is where actually the parts of the story that relate to the organ begin to come forward. Hi, I'm Alex Dijkhuis. I'm Head of Communications and Development at Sacred Heart. The Society of the Sacred Heart was founded by someone called Madeleine Sophie Barras, now Saint Madeleine Sophie Barras. She was canonised in 1925. She set up the society in Paris in the 1800s, and by the 1900s they had loads of convents and successful schools all over France, but also elsewhere abroad. But in the early 1900s, when France began to move to secularisation, they knew that they were going to be expelled from France, and that's really where the story of our organ begins. The chapel here was designed by John Francis Bentley as part of the seminary. There was the window at the back was filled with stone and painted with the saints, and he put in an organ behind a stone screen on the right. We have slowly over time been trying to restore aspects of the chapel. We have installed a new stone floor, we've cleaned all the stonework, we've put in some new furniture. Before that was some sort of mismatched plastic chairs, and now the whole place is beginning to look a little bit more like a sacred space, as it should do. Our next attention has been turned to the lights, and we have applications in now to the Historic Churches Committee to try to get approval to install some new lights. Actually, one's designed by Bentley himself. But at this point, our attention then turned to the organ. The organ hasn't worked, certainly all the time I've been here, which is 13 years. I think probably at least 15 years it hasn't worked. So I called an organ restorer to come and do a condition survey to have a look at the organ and work out what's wrong with it and how much it might possibly cost to restore it. So it was William McVicker who I called upon. He is the controller of the organs at the Royal Festival Hall and professor of organology at the Royal College of Music. When he arrived, actually it was really interesting, he was completely distracted by our cloister paintings. We're currently raising money to restore the cloister paintings, and he came in and was just wanting to walk round and round the cloisters looking at the paintings without going up to the organ, and he actually found a small painting in the cloisters of St. Cecilia, who is a patron saint of music and is holding some organ pipes. So anyway, eventually I managed to get him up to the organ, and when he opened the lid, he was sort of dumbstruck and looked at it and was sort of suggesting that it was odd that the stops were written in French or Flemish. And so he was beginning to doubt, was this actually the original organ that was put in by Bentley or not? We were looking together at the size of it and thinking, could it actually, because at the moment it's at the back of the chapel, could its width have fitted in what is now Our Lady Chapel, where we know Bentley originally put an organ in? And we both thought it was possible but tight. All the electric, so when it came here at one point it was electrified, but there was a hand pump on the side, and William asked me to operate that pump in order to play some music, which of course I'd never heard. And when we looked inside, like, all the pipes are down everywhere, so no doubt it was not in tune, but to me it sounded marvellous just to hear it for the first time. He wondered, because he'd actually said to me he had tried to look up the organ before he came here, but he couldn't find it anywhere on the National Organ Register, so to a large extent it was a completely unknown entity. And he said there was a possibility, it looked like it might have been made by Lauret. I had no idea who Lauret was. Of course, I've since looked him up. There's a man called Hippolyte Lauret. And he said the stops on this organ resemble the stops on another organ he'd seen made by Lauret. But he said, I can't believe it's a Lauret. If it's a Lauret, it would be the rarest organ I've ever seen. It would certainly be the rarest organ in England. It would be a sort of career-defining moment for me. Of course, I got all excited, and he said, well, what you've really got to do is go away and find the provenance of this organ. Find out, was this the organ installed by Bentley? Bentley used another organ maker normally, so he thought that was unlikely. Or was this organ actually brought with the Society of the Sacred Heart? So then I went to the Society to get some help, and they went to the National Archives in Rome. And the archivist in Rome said, it's really coincidental that you're asking about the organ, because I've been approached recently by a Parisian organist and historian of musical instruments called Eric Humbert-Cloud, who has been searching for a particular Loret organ, and I'm thinking this might be the organ that he's been looking for. So obviously we spoke to Eric Humbert-Cloud, who is a Loret expert, and we also looked at all the records in the archives, and we found that when the Society were expelled from France in the periods just before that, they had a boarding school in Paris. It was actually their headquarters. It was called Hotel Biron, and by that I don't mean a hotel. It was never a hotel. The word is used a bit like the stately home of the Biron family, so like Devonshire House or something. So they owned this stately home in the middle of Paris, and the main building was a boarding school, and at the back of the garden there was the mother house and a day school and a poor school, and they used the money raised from the boarding school to run the other two schools on the site. And indeed, Madeleine Sophie Barras, the founder of the Society, lived there at Hotel Biron, but she had died by the time the expulsions were happening in France, and there was another superior general there at the time called Mabel Digby. Mabel Digby was shrewd, and she knew the expulsions were going to happen, and the French government wanted to seize the assets and properties and land of any religious orders and expel them from the country. And they were particularly targeting religious orders that focused on education, which is absolutely what the Society of the Sacred Heart did at the time. So when they knew this was going to happen, Mabel Digby organised the nuns to start shipping out important bits of their possessions, so that by the time the authorities arrived at their door to come and do an inventory, actually the nuns were sleeping on mattresses on the floor. There was virtually nothing there. And we found out from the archives that there were organs on that site. Actually, there were 3 organs. So there was one in the chapel that related to the boarding school. There was one in the mother house, and there was one in the day school. And there is a lovely note in the archives in Rome talking about the migration of the organs. And the one in the mother house was sent to San Remo. The one from the boarding school was sent by train to Budapest, and the one from the day school came to Hammersmith. And we have records of in the English archives here of the organ being rebuilt here when it arrived. So it left France in 1904, it arrived here the same year, and we have the records and we know the company that rebuilt it here. What I hadn't really cottoned on to, which has now slightly blown my mind, is that Hotel Biron in Paris is now the Musée Rodin. It's the Rodin Museum in the centre of Paris. I was there in April, and I had no idea that's where our organ came from. As you enter the Musée Rodin site, the stately home, as it was, the actual museum now is in front of you, and on the right is a gift shop. That was one of the chapels. So of course I've now gone and looked at how the chapel was originally. If you imagine it had a roof like this and a stained glass window in the bottom bit, so that top bit has been sliced right off. I've no idea what happened to the stained glass window, but underneath it where the gift shop is, there are still some windows on the side that still have Sacred Heart symbols in them. But that wasn't the particular chapel where our organ came from. It came from one at the further end of the garden at the bottom end, from the day school. So now we know where it came from, but that doesn't solve the mystery of who built it, who put it together. And that's where Eric came in, Eric Humbert-Cloud from Paris. he had a catalogue from a company that took over the works of Hippolyte Laurey, and that catalogue shows all the organs that Hippolyte Laurey built, and actually all of those 3 organs on the site at Hotel Biron were built by Hippolyte Laurey. And the pièce de résistance is that Eric has a letter, handwritten letter, I've seen an image of it, written by Hippolyte Laurey to the Society about his making of the organ for the day school, which we know is the one that we have. And he is apologising to the Society at the time for the unusual expense that he's charging for making this organ, because he has incorporated a number of special features. Now, at the moment, I don't know what those special features are. That is still another stage to look at. But what we need to do now is to go and find out how it was reassembled here. So the company that reassembled it still exists, so we need to, if possible, go and look at their archival materials, and then with the help of Dr. McVicker, I'm hoping we can put together some tender documents to see how we might want it restored. Do we want it restored exactly to how he built it originally? Do we want it restored to how it was put together when it was assembled here? All these things need to be looked at. And then, of course, we need to draw up some tender documents and then apply for some funding to restore it. The school won't be able to afford to restore it itself, and indeed our funds are there for the education of our pupils. But I do feel in the longer term this is going to add incredible value for the pupil experience here at Sacred Heart. They'll be able to learn the organ. We'll be able to play the organ when we have liturgies and masses. We'll be able to have concerts. We'll be able to have organ recitals where the public could come in. So now that we know the background to the organ, how it was saved by the Society from France, it gives it this additional importance really to the school. It's something, if we can get it working again, will be treasured and utilised, I hope, for the benefit not only of the community, including our students here at Sacred Heart, but also for the public. This is an incredibly rare artefact. I understand the rarest in England. So how fantastic is that?